Story 1. After my last breakup, I had no choice but to move back in with my family. My ex and I had been living in Boston together, sharing an apartment we leased. A little advice for anyone who will listen. Never sign a lease with someone you just started dating. Trust me on this. Turns out he was not the person I thought he was. My parents live out in western Massachusetts. If you are familiar with the area, you will know that the farther west you go, the more rural it gets. I am not exactly the country girl type. I much prefer being in or near a major city, especially since I am still in my 20s. My parents' place is in a small, sleepy town that feels pretty lifeless. I am hoping this living situation is temporary until I can afford my own place. However, I will be steering clear of Boston for now for obvious reasons. To make ends meet, I had to go back to my old job at the urgent care facility I worked at before I moved out. They were happy to have me back, even if it is just for a short while. The downside is that I mostly work overnight shifts. While those shifts are easy, they are painfully boring, and they totally ruin my sleep schedule. Not that my social life is anything to brag about here. After my shifts, I usually grab what counts as dinner for me. That means takeout, since not much else is open at 4 in the morning. On this particular morning, I decided to treat myself. There is a bagel place that opens right at 4 a.m., and they serve more than just bagels. I grabbed a chicken sandwich and a salad to eat at home. On my way back, I had to stop for gas. I pulled into the Shell station, one of the few places open at that hour. The parking lot is massive, but it is always eerily empty, even during the day. I went inside to pay with cash. It is cheaper that way, then headed back to the pump. By the time I got to my car, another vehicle, a blue sedan, had pulled in. A man got out and started fueling his car at one of the other pumps. I began filling up my car too, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed him lock the handle on his pump so he did not have to hold it. Then, to my surprise, he walked right over to my side and said, "Want to see a funny trick?" I instantly regretted making eye contact, but for some reason, I answered, "What trick?" He started doing that dumb old gag where you fold one finger down and pretend you are pulling it off. He looked at me with this strange mix of a sarcastic smile and dead seriousness. It was hard to tell if he thought this was genuinely funny or if he was mocking himself. Either way, it was awkward. I forced a laugh, hoping he would take the hint and leave, but he kept at it. Even when I turned away and pretended to ignore him, he just stood there, doing his little trick. Finally, I heard the gas pump click, signaling that my tank was full. I hurriedly put the nozzle back, rushed inside to grab my change, and when I came back out, he was nowhere to be seen. Oddly enough, his car was still there, and the hose was still pumping gas into it. I got into my car, but a wave of paranoia hit me. I checked the back seat to make sure he was not hiding back there, then locked the doors and took off. I made it home in about 5 minutes, eager to eat my late night, or should I say early morning dinner. At home, I used the spare key my parents always hide near the front door to let myself in. I quickly returned it to its spot, locked the door behind me, and headed to the kitchen. I was trying to be as quiet as possible so I would not wake my parents. As I was halfway through my meal, I heard the sound of the front door unlocking, followed by it opening and closing. I froze mid-bite. With my mouth full, I called out, "Mom? Dad?" No one answered. I did not hear any footsteps or any other sounds. Heart pounding, I left the kitchen to check the foyer, but no one was there. My stomach dropped, and I felt like I could barely breathe. Without thinking, I sprinted upstairs and burst into my parents' bedroom, throwing the door open so hard it banged against the wall. Both of them sat up, startled awake by my dramatic entrance. I stood there, struggling to catch my breath, and finally managed to say, "Someone just came inside the house." My voice was shaking, and I could barely get the words out. My dad wasted no time. He jumped out of bed and headed straight downstairs. I followed closely, though my legs felt like they might give out. He turned on every single light as we moved through the house, room by room. Finally, he went outside to check the spot where we kept the spare key, and it was gone. My mom and I stared at each other in horror. She looked like she was about to cry, but she still managed to lecture me. "You need to be more careful. Did you even check your surroundings before putting the key back? I felt awful. She was right, of course, but this was not the time for a lecture. My dad continued searching every room, opening closets, checking under furniture, leaving no stone unturned. When he got to my older brother's room, he moved on quickly, leaving the lights on as he headed for the next area. I lingered behind in that room, feeling like he might have missed something. Deep down, I did not actually expect to find anyone, but I checked anyway. I crouched down to look under the bed. Nothing. I opened the closets. Nothing. Feeling slightly relieved, I went back downstairs. My dad was already in the basement, checking every dark corner down there. I was too scared to follow him, even though I knew he was just a few feet away. Instead, I stayed on the main floor with my mom, though my curiosity got the better of me. I wandered into the dining room, which is right next to the foyer near the front door. Something told me to check under the table. I got down on my hands and knees, lifted the tablecloth, and there he was. It was the man from the gas station. I froze. For a second, it felt like time stopped, like my brain could not process what I was seeing. But then I screamed, loud, piercing, and instinctive. My mom heard me and screamed too. The man scrambled out from under the table as my dad rushed upstairs, faster than I had ever seen him move. My dad, a man in his 60s, charged straight at the intruder without hesitation. He grabbed him and tried to hold him back, but the man was stronger. Seeing my dad struggle, my mom and I jumped in. We hit, punched, and did whatever we could to help him. With all three of us fighting, the man finally gave up and ran for the front door. He yanked it open and bolted into the night. We called the police immediately. Thank God they arrived quickly. However, the man still had the spare key. That thought alone made it hard to sleep. The officers left a patrol car in our driveway to deter him from coming back, and my dad wedged a chair under the front doorknob before settling down to sleep in the living room. The next morning, he replaced the front door lock, and that was the end of my parents' habit of hiding a key outside. I still feel guilty for bringing that man to my family's home. It was careless of me not to check my surroundings, and I probably should have noticed if someone was following me. Thinking back, I bet he kept his headlights off the entire drive, which is why I never saw him. I am just grateful that my family is safe. But this experience has only made me want to move out even more. I already hated being stuck in this rural area, and now I cannot even enjoy my nighttime drives without worrying about what, or who, might be lurking in the dark. Story 2. I am from New York, Long Island specifically, and let me tell you, the traffic here is brutal. My brother lives down in Florida, and I like to visit him whenever I can, but that drive is no joke. Depending on the time you leave, it can take upwards of 18 hours. I usually hit the road super early, around 2 a.m., so I can dodge the worst of the traffic before the morning rush. So, it was a quiet Thursday morning at 2 a.m. when I packed up my car and headed out. First stop, Dunkin' Donuts for my much-needed coffee. I had a long, tiring drive ahead of me, and caffeine was essential. I was driving instead of flying this time because I planned to stay in Florida for a whole month, and I did not want to burden my brother with driving me everywhere. By the time I made it off Long Island, it was past 3 a.m. From there, the drive through New Jersey was smooth sailing. Once you escape New York, the route to Florida is pretty straightforward. Just hop on Interstate 95 and stay on it all the way down. Around 4 a.m., though, my stomach started growling. I had skipped breakfast before leaving because, honestly, I am never hungry right after waking up so early. But now, hunger was hitting me hard. I pulled off Interstate 95 as soon as I spotted a sign for food. Wendy's caught my eye, and I figured I could grab a quick breakfast. The exit led me to some remote area in New Jersey. It was pitch dark. No streetlights, just my car's headlights cutting through the blackness. When I pulled into the Wendy's parking lot, I saw a few lights on and one car parked there. The drive-through menu was lit up, so I assumed they were open. I pulled up to the intercom and waited for someone to speak. After sitting there for over a minute, I even said, "Excuse me," but there was no response. Confused, I pulled out my phone to check the hours for that location. Sure enough, it did not open until 6 a.m. Just as I was about to drive off, 3 sharp knocks on my window nearly made me jump out of my seat. I turned to see a man standing outside my car, smiling at me. He motioned for me to roll down the window. I was not too comfortable with that, so I only cracked it open slightly, just enough to hear him. The man said, "This place isn't open." I nodded and replied, "Yeah, I just found that out." He then explained that his car battery had died, and he pointed toward the lone car parked in the far corner of the lot, near the woods. He asked if I could help him jumpstart his car, practically begging me. At first, I told him I did not have jumper cables, but he quickly said he had some in his trunk. I glanced again at his car, sitting in that shadowy corner, and hesitated for a moment. But then I thought about karma. How could I leave someone stranded like this if I could help? I agreed to help him, and he stepped back to let me pull my car closer to his. He had parked head-in, so I aligned my car's hood with his and popped my hood. The man went to get his jumper cables and connected them to the terminals on both cars. Once everything was set, I started my engine and told him to try starting his car. He walked back to his car, but it would not start. We waited a little longer and tried again. Still nothing. This was odd since he had just driven the car here. Usually, a battery only needs a brief charge to get going again. The man asked me to hang tight while he stepped away to make a phone call. He spoke in Spanish, keeping his voice low, so I could not understand what he was saying. When he came back, he said his friend told him to wait a few more minutes and then try again. I agreed, though I was starting to feel uneasy. I wanted to help, but I also did not want to waste too much time. Then, just as I was waiting, I heard the roar of 2 pickup truck engines revving aggressively and speeding into the parking lot. The trucks came roaring into the parking lot, one from each side of the building. As soon as I saw them, it clicked in my head. "Oh no!" I muttered under my breath as I scrambled to remove the jumper cables from my car battery. My hands were shaking as I slammed my hood shut, but it was too late. The 2 trucks had pulled up behind my car, blocking me in. I glanced at the man who had asked for my help, and the look on his face sent a chill down my spine. He was still smiling, but now it was a dark, twisted grin that made my stomach drop. That sinister expression is burned into my memory forever. Without thinking twice, I hit the lock button on my key fob, securing my car, and bolted into the woods. The darkness was overwhelming, and branches scraped against my legs as I sprinted blindly. My heart was pounding in my ears, and every step felt like I was tripping over roots or rocks. When I finally stumbled and fell hard onto the ground, I decided to stay down. I curled up as small as I could, hoping the shadows would hide me. I could hear voices shouting in Spanish nearby, at least 3 distinct voices. My fear was paralyzing. I did not know how many men there were, if they were armed, or what they wanted, but I felt certain my life was in danger. The voices got louder as they moved closer, and I held my breath, trying not to make a single sound. Then, just as quickly, the voices began to fade, retreating deeper into the woods. For a brief moment, relief washed over me. But that relief was shattered when I heard the unmistakable sound of my car alarm blaring in the distance. My heart sank. Everything I had packed, my clothes, shoes, watches, bracelets, all of it was in my car. Hundreds of dollars worth of my belongings were in there. I crouched low and started making my way back toward the parking lot, moving as quietly as I could. When I got close enough to see, my stomach turned. My car was the only vehicle left in the lot. The man's car and the 2 trucks were gone. I sprinted to my car, dread pooling in my chest. The rear window was shattered, and everything inside was gone. My suitcase, the bags in the back seat, my whole trip packed into those items. I stood there, completely overwhelmed, and tears started streaming down my face. The stress, fear, and frustration hit me all at once. I called the police and explained everything. When the officers arrived, they assured me they would obtain CCTV footage from the Wendy's when it opened. They took my information, but there was nothing more I could do at that moment. They told me I did not need to stay and that they would contact me if they found anything. Defeated, I got back in my car and began the 2-hour drive home. It was the most miserable drive of my life. I felt violated, angry, and helpless all at once. A few days later, the police called me back. They explained that the car left in the parking lot had fake plates, and the two trucks had no plates at all. The officer said they would keep investigating, but I could tell he was just trying to give me a shred of hope. None of my belongings were ever recovered. Those criminals got away with everything. To this day, I hold on to the belief in karma. I hope they got what was coming to them eventually. We have all been on those long road trips, right? You pass rest area signs and think, can I hold out for another 20 minutes? Sometimes you are lucky and find a big rest stop with food and facilities. Other times, it is just a small building with bathrooms and nothing else. But after what happened to me that night, I have learned to be a lot more cautious about where I stop on the road. Story 3. I was in the middle of a long road trip, a solid 15-hour drive actually, and a big chunk of that drive happened to be at night. I will not bother saying where I was headed or where I had come from because honestly it does not really matter. What does matter is that I was somewhere in a quiet, out-of-the-way spot on the east coast of the United States. It was the kind of place where not much was happening, especially in the middle of the night. There were barely any cars on the road at that hour, and I was starting to feel the strain of the drive. I had been sitting in the same spot for so long that I was getting restless, and to make matters worse, I needed to use the bathroom pretty badly. So, I began watching for one of those blue highway signs that let you know a rest area is coming up. After a while, I finally spotted one, and seeing that sign was like finding an oasis in the desert. A few miles down the road, I pulled off into the rest area. It was a small one, but it had a restroom building, which was all I cared about at that moment. There were no trucks parked there. I am pretty sure trucks can only park overnight at specific truck stops, but there was one other car in the lot. I figured the driver might be asleep inside, trying to get some rest before continuing their journey. As I got out of my car, I stretched a little, trying to shake off the stiffness from sitting for so long. My curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced over at the other car. The windows were tinted, so I could not tell if anyone was inside. Not that it mattered much, I was more focused on getting to that bathroom. When I walked into the restroom, I was immediately greeted by a strange and unsettling sight. There was a man standing in the corner of the room, his head tilted downward, facing the wall with his back to me. At first, I thought he might be using one of the urinals, but then I realized he was not even standing in front of one. He was just there, staring at the corner of the room. I froze for a second, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to ask if he was all right, but something about the situation made me too uneasy. It was so bizarre that I decided to keep quiet and mind my own business. I needed to walk past him to get to the stall, though, and I will not lie, I felt a little scared as I got closer to him. Once I was inside the stall, I closed the door and tried to relax, but it was impossible. I am not someone who can use the bathroom with someone else in the room, and the silence in there was almost deafening. I stood there for about a minute, hoping I could at least go, but it just was not happening. Feeling frustrated, I flushed the toilet anyway and stepped out of the stall. That is when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The man had turned around. He was still standing in the exact same spot, but now he was facing me. I could see his face clearly, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most unsettling faces I have ever seen. There was something about his eyes that sent a chill down my spine, and his blank expression only made it worse. I had not spoken to anyone in over 10 hours, and this was not the kind of interaction I was ready for. Without saying a word, I turned around and walked out of the bathroom as quickly as I could. Once I got back to my car, I wasted no time starting the engine and backing out of the parking space. As I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw the man walking toward my car. I hit the gas and got back onto the highway as fast as I could. Even though I was relieved to be away from that creepy man, I still had one problem. I really needed to use the bathroom. I figured I could hold it for another 20 minutes or so until I reached the next rest area. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, I pulled into another rest stop. It looked almost identical to the last one, but this time, there were no other cars in the parking lot. That was a relief. I parked right in front of the restroom and hurried inside to take care of business. As I was finishing up in the stall, I heard the sound of footsteps entering the bathroom. At first, I thought the person would stop at one of the urinals, But instead, the footsteps came right up to my stall. They stopped directly in front of the door. Through the gap at the bottom of the stall door, I could see a pair of shoes. Whoever it was, they were standing right there, not moving. My first thought was that it was the man from the other bathroom. Maybe he had followed me. For a moment I froze. I felt paralyzed by anxiety and fear. Finally, I managed to speak. "Someone is in here," I said, my voice shaky. But there was no response. That is when I realized I might be in serious trouble. The only thing I could think to do in that moment was grab my phone and dial 911. I put the call on speaker, hoping the sound of the operator's voice might scare the man off. As soon as I heard the operator say, "911, what is your emergency?" I answered loud and clear, "I am being followed by a dangerous man, and I feel threatened." I made sure to speak loudly, hoping the man would get the message. As the operator asked me for my location and other details, I answered everything in a firm, confident tone, as if to let the man know I was not alone in this anymore. Thank God it worked. The moment he heard the operator's voice and my responses, the man turned and walked out of the bathroom without saying a word. I stayed on the line with the operator and told them what had just happened. I explained that I still felt unsafe and would rather wait inside the bathroom until the police arrived. The operator assured me help was on the way, and I stayed put, heart pounding, listening for any sound outside the door. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the bathroom door, followed by a voice identifying itself as law enforcement. That was my cue to come out. I opened the door and saw a police officer standing there, which instantly made me feel a lot safer. I described the man to the officer, detailing his unsettling appearance and the strange behavior I had witnessed at the first rest area. I also mentioned the car I had seen in the parking lot there, explaining that I was almost certain the same man had followed me to the second rest stop. The officer and I checked my car together to make sure nothing had been tampered with. Fortunately, everything seemed fine, but the officer stayed with me for a bit longer to make sure the coast was clear. Once we were confident the man was gone, the officer escorted me out of the rest area and followed me back onto the highway. After a few miles, the officer turned off onto another road, leaving me to finish the rest of my trip. The rest of the drive went smoothly, but the whole experience stuck with me. It was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I had never been followed before, and I was almost certain the man at the second rest area was the same one I had seen in the first bathroom. What made it even stranger was that I am a man myself. For some reason, I always thought situations like this were more likely to happen to women, but I guess this just goes to show it can happen to anyone.